Welcome to this episode of BCTV Open Studio, the mayoral vote counterpoint. I'm your host, Olga Peters, and I am a reporter with the Commons. This is my colleague, Randy Holhut, who will be joining us today. And speaking on the issue will be Tony Duncan and Spoon Agave. Thank you for joining us today, gentlemen. And just for context for the audience, we want to remind folks that on March 3rd is Brattleboro's town elections, and one of the questions on the ballot will be a non-binding question about whether or not the town should shift its form of governance from a select board / town manager form of governance to a mayoral system. And some details are still forthcoming about the mayoral system. It will depend on how the vote goes on Tuesday. But a few weeks ago, we had two proponents of the question. So two people in favor of the question, Dick DeGray and Dan Yates, here on the show, talking about why they thought it would be a good idea. And today, Tony and Spoon will talk about the other side of the issue. So thank you so much for being here today. Let's start with just a very broad question, which is, what do you feel is working about our current system now?
I'll start. I've been a resident of Brattleboro since 2001 and have been just vaguely aware of the political issues and not that involved and more interested in national political things. I became a board member of Brattleboro Time Trade, got involved in sort of local organizations there, and then the last couple of years I've been getting very involved in local politics. I became a town representative last year, and the fact of our current organization is what's allowed me, and I think has motivated me, to become very active politically. I'm now on the Energy Committee. I worked on the Sustainability Coordinator issue. I'm working with the Sustainability Coordinator on a couple of different initiatives. I'm excited about the governance here. I think there are things that can be remarkably improved, but I feel very strongly that if we didn't have that, the town meeting system, I would have not really necessarily gotten involved. I think the feeling that, wow, I can be one out of a whole bunch of people who actually have a direct impact on how the town is governed was very. There was something that was sort of shocking to me and something that made me feel motivated to really want to get involved. And I'm very excited that I am doing that, and I'm spending a lot of time and effort involved in that.
Spoon, do you have?
I think what's working now is that we have a highly skilled town manager. And, but also, I feel there is a shift now. We are finally seeing my generation disappear from town meeting, and a new younger generation. And it reflects our interest. My generation never considered and could not consider climate issues, what the effects of the things we did would be, because of the assumption that everything would be okay, that they, whoever they was, would fix it. And now it's become apparent that there is no they, and things are in very bad condition. And so the younger generation now that's moving in, the 30 and 40-year-olds, are seeing the world and everything about them in a very different light. They are more concerned about climate and the future than they are about what's happening right now, about $20 more or less in their pockets because of a tax rate.
Do you think that with that generational shift in town meeting representation, that that might be a part of the impetus for the changing town government? Is there a feeling that this new generation of town meeting reps are maybe a little too active?
I don't know what too active could mean. We convene every year and we do our work, our business. And we do it from the time we start to the time we convene, and that time is filled. And I wouldn't know how to. So, you do bring up a good point. What do you mean by too active?
Well, let's say this past year's town meeting where suddenly, from the floor, a new town position was created, where suddenly from the floor, social services spending was increased.
I can add to that, just as someone who's covered town meeting for a few years. There was a number of years, so I've been at the Commons about 10, so that's the number that I've been covering town meeting, annual town meeting. And for most of those years, the budget there was an impetus to keep the budget level or down. And I would say in the past 2, maybe 3 years,
Yep.
There's been from the floor a push up for the budget, especially around human services and environmental issues. So that's the trend I've seen.
Yeah, in other words, the town meeting has kind of gone from you got to keep my taxes down to we got to make the town more livable and help deal with problems that may not traditionally be town meeting problems. And I was just wondering, especially you, Spoon, having dealt with the charter and with town meeting for many years, whether you think those factors might be behind the move toward having a mayor.
Maybe. I can't really be sure. I mean, I have had the thought, and I mentioned this earlier to Tony, that what Mr. DeGray hasn't quite gotten a grasp of is the very transition that's happening that I'm talking about. And so I had the feeling that what he's trying to do is restore that older establishment. But I don't know, because I feel he's been pretty coy about exactly what he's after.
Do you feel like that it's been accurately explained to people what this whole system entails?
Well, that's one of probably my biggest specific objection. And I just want to respond to what the question you were saying before, is I think that it is a valid concern to say that this group of people who are in town meeting might not be representative of the real desires of all of the citizens. It's possible for, since we don't have campaigns and we don't have explicit town representatives saying what their issues are, that it's possible that you could have a distortion from what the popular will is. But to me, if that's the case, then what you do is you get people who support your positions to be on the, to run for town representative. I don't see that being an issue that's reason to change our entire structure of government. And what were you just asking? I'm sorry, because I wanted to go back to that the switch over to a mayoral system, the big question people have is, what does this all mean, and how does this happen, and why are we doing it? And do you get the sense that it hasn't been adequately explained to the people of Brattleboro? That's an area where Spoon and I kind of disagree a bit, and I think he makes a very good point. So I'm not quite as convinced of my position now. My main objection to this was that if there had been a ballot proposal to say, we want the select board to explore this option or to explore different government options, I wouldn't have an objection to that. It's been brought up that this is just advisory, but to me it's still a vote saying the will of the people want the select board to do this thing. So that has been a lot of my objection. I think that it's really putting the cart before the horse to say, let's vote on this. What I would want to do is say, let's explore this, have discussions about it, take a year or whatever, time to go through the process of really explaining what our governance is now, trying to make sure that people understand the issues, and then when people are more informed, then have some sort of vote, and you could maybe even have a binding vote if it seemed like there was reason to do that or enough support to do something like that.
Go ahead, Spoon.
There's a couple of things. One is, when this began, we all got thrown into, and this is because of our lack of understanding of government, of town charters, and democracy itself. We all got thrown into a debate between just two things. One was our town government, which we know as we see it, and a mayoralty, which we see as what we've seen of typical mayoralties throughout our life experience in this country. We have just two models in mind. And in fact, as the people of the town have all the power, their charter is their social contract, which we lay out how we want to govern ourselves. There are a gazillion different things that can go into a charter with either system. And so we could continue with a town manager system that would not look much like this, or we could have a mayoralty that doesn't look anything like a mayoralty that we imagine.
So I'm glad you brought up the charter, Spoon, because if I remember correctly, a few years ago, the Charter Commission actually reviewed whether or not to have a mayor. Were you on?
I was.
And what can you recall at the time?
Well,
some
vaguely,
of the decisions?
yes. We looked at it and we did explore it to a fair extent. We actually called in mayors from other towns in Vermont. And even actually we had called in the mayor of Greenfield, which had been the mayor there for just a year or two. They had just made the transition from town manager to mayor. We heard from Mary Hooper. She was a weak mayor, now a legislator. She was a weak mayor of Montpelier. We heard from the mayors, I forgot their names, of Rutland and Barry, who were strong mayors. We looked at the issue pretty closely. We compared them. And we may not have given it its total due, because nobody on the committee, and that included a whole range of left to right, and nobody had a sense that there was much interest in the town for making that change.
Mm-hmm. So then I'll go back a little bit to a question I asked at the beginning of the show, but tweak it a little bit. For folks who are sitting at home and saying, okay, well, I'm voting on March 3rd, which way do I vote? I mean, what do you feel would be the reasons to hang on to our current system, if any?
Can I just answer something first? I've been talking to people, for the last couple of weeks about this since I found out about it, and basically nobody I know who's talked to me about this, who isn't really actively involved in government, has any idea what it means. Very, very few people in town know what our government structure is, and they don't know what this proposal is. And so basically people have been asking my opinion, so I've been telling them what I think they should do. And again, it's like, well, is that fair? Am I being honest? Am I giving them the correct information? Again, to me, it's a question that, because it's a primary vote, lots of people are going to be voting because they want their particular candidate for president. And again, that's part of my concern, is that I think there aren't going to be a lot of people who really have a thoughtful understanding of what the issue is.
So, Spoon, go ahead.
When I heard about this issue, I was immediately aware that there was a lot of reasons driving it, and I could take a guess as Randy has it. Maybe it had to do with what had transpired at last year's town meeting. But I was pretty careful not to make any inferences with any certainty. So I was looking for what might be behind it. And as I read one of Mr. DeGray's interviews, maybe he repeated that on his show that you had him, he used two words: accountability and participation. And those are the two issues at the bottom of all of this. And those are two issues that do deserve very deep examination.
I would agree. So, but I think the question, again, I'm thinking of people at home who are wondering what to do. Does our current system provide for those two things? Or would a mayoral system provide for those two things better?
We have to look at it. The expectation is, but of course that's all it is an expectation, is that if it were to pass, the select board would now reconvene a new charter revision commission. We would have to anyway in 3 years. And they would throw it in there. And it would get a hard look again in there. And I've honestly gone up and back as to whether I was interested in seeing this pass or not. I would like to continue the probe, the discussion into accountability and participation to try and decide what it should mean in our town and whether what we would like it to be is the way it is or it needs some improvements. So I have a hunch that a charter revision commission is going to examine this whether it passes or not. So in a way, how people vote is a flip of the coin that may not, probably won't change the outcome in whether we make such a transition to a mayoralty or not.
Well, if the current system we have could be characterized as the town manager is the CEO, the select board is the board of directors, and the town meeting reps are the shareholder representatives, and that vote on up or down on decisions. And a mayoral system would kind of amputate the shareholder representatives, concentrate more power into the CEO, and make the city council kind of I don't know what you would characterize them as, the new improved town select board as city council. If you're talking about representation and participation, how does a mayoral system improve upon the current system?
Well, I mean, I think it just, like you said, it kind of amputates a huge number of people. And in my initial response to your first question was that existed made it, I think made it possible for me to really get seriously involved. But I do think that there are issues with that. And I do think, DeGray brought up about the number of town reps that are brought in caucus rather than voted for. And, I think there needs to be a lot more interest and involvement. My feeling, I like what Spoon has been saying about, looking at the whole system. What are the things we can do to change the system, and what are the things that are going to be effective? I'm sort of opposing this sort of, well, let's just go wholesale to this other system. What I would like to do is see what we can do to improve what we have now, and figure out ways to get more involvement, get the, my understanding is that the town representatives used to have sort of forums that they would do to their districts, and I would really like to do that. I think that there are ways of addressing this issue without making such a drastic change. From talking to Spoon, I did not realize this before talking to him, but he's offering some interesting things about things that that we're not limited in what we can do in terms of addressing the town charter. And from the interview with DeGray and Yates and other things I've heard people talk, it did seem to me like it was like this. Well, it's either this or this. And with Spoon saying that we have a tremendous amount of latitude in what we can do, I'd certainly be open to to opening up the town charter and, what are the things that we can do?
I'll explain that in more depth. What you did, Randy, was describe the classic mayoralty. And, but if we started with that and said, well, here's what a classic mayoralty would look like, but it's not doing what we want it to do, then you can begin modifying that. And for instance, what would happen if at the same time we went to a mayoralty, we instituted ranked voting? Or at the same time, or we began making little modifications like campaigning could only be for 2 months, from Labor Day to Election Day. And there could, whether there could be a limit, and may require 4 major debates on 4 major areas. And so, in other words, to try to diminish the really fouled up electoral campaign system that we have. And we could go on and on. I can't right now, but using the ability to shape our government to suit ourselves. We could change the issue, comes up, strong mayor, weak mayor. How much veto power would a council get? How big would a council get? If you required 8 out of 9 to veto something, it would be a very strong mayor. If you only required 5 out of 9 to veto something, it's a much weaker mayor. If a mayor can write a check for $5,000, then that mayor is not nearly as strong as one who can write a check on their own signature for $100,000. So there's a almost infinite number of things in which one can shape and modify and design a government to be just the one that we want.
So what issues do you feel, or what areas is our current government not serving, or where is it not working? What needs to be fixed? And how would we fix them, either within the current structure or by going to a different structure? Because it's one thing to just talk about designing the government we want, but do we know what what needs we're actually trying to meet when we say those things?
Well, I think there's, I've talked to a number of people who have said, well, Yates and DeGray haven't really specifically said, it's sort of nebulous. And one of my concerns is that there's sort of things that they don't feel they can talk about because it would be attacked. I don't like that situation. I think they probably have really valid concerns that are important, probably business concerns, things about the increase in the local tax rate, things like that, that maybe are politically sort of sensitive and it can't be, openly discussed. And I think we need to be able to do that. I think that's unfair. I might disagree with them about all of them, but it's important to really bring out what the real issues are. One of the things that I liked about last year's town meeting was you have people who I know are like really radical and people who are really conservative, and they're arguing very specifically about issues. They're arguing about, these are the facts as I see them, this is how I think we should do them. This person is saying, well, I'm not sure that I agree with that, we should do it this way. It's not overtly political in a partisan way. And I would be very disturbed. One of the things I'm concerned about is having Republican for mayor, Democrat for mayor, this level of progressive for mayor, this moderate for mayor, and campaign signs on people's lawns. So, I think Spoon knows a lot better. I'm just the last few years getting involved with this, but that question is the question that I'm asking, that I want to look at, and where I want to move forward from.
I look at it from going back to those two big concepts of sustainability, accountability, and participation, and then try and define those terms, and then begin to design or create things that address them. For instance, if we understand that one of the bulwarks of a democracy is participation, then of course we want the most that we can get. So then we have to find out why people aren't participating and what would increase their interest in participating. Most of the time we find that it's knowledge. It's knowledge and a sense that, and also that their participation makes a difference. And an example, the school board just sent around a card that I received, most of us in Brattleboro I guess did, warning us of their meeting. And essentially 3/4 of the card was empty when it could have been filled with vital information that a citizen might be interested in knowing and therefore attending their meeting. And it probably never occurred to the school board to put that information on. We have to get out of that habit.
Thank you, Spoon. We're just about coming to the end of time. Randy, was there any other questions you wanted to ask? Anything you wanted to add, wish we had asked?
One thing that has nothing to do with this is that I work at NECA, and I just really appreciate that Dan Yates made a tremendous effort in helping our organization. So I have great respect for him. I'm glad that we were able to do this. The main thing I wanted to say is I didn't want to have this to be an opposing view from theirs. There are reasons why I don't support it. Talking with Spoon beforehand adjusted that because he gave me a lot of information I didn't know about. So I'm just glad that we were able to do this. And my focus really is on solving problems and how do we work together to find out solutions. My concern again with this proposal is it's just trying to jump to something completely different, and I don't think that's warranted at this point.
Thank you. And before we go to Spoon, there's an event happening this weekend as well. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So there's a forum that should be a neutral forum about this issue, just again to give information to the public. It's going to be at Epsilon Spires on Main Street at 3 o'clock. Spoon is going to be there, David Gartenstein and Marshall Wheelock. There's going to be a moderator. There's room for, I think, 170 people or something, and there's going to be time for question and answer, and also time afterwards for people to discuss and mingle and consider this.
Thank you. Spoon, anything you wanted to add?
Well, only that I thought it very appropriate that Tony had concluded by saying that when he heard new information, he was rethinking his position or a lot about how he was thinking about it, and that underscores my whole thing about participation and being informed, because it's not just being there, but it's being able to make an informed decision, and that is an area that needs a lot of improvement in our town and our democracy.
Thank you, Spoon. I think my takeaway for today is, if you are a Brattleboro voter and you're sitting with this question, stay with our current system, say say yes to exploring a mayoral system. If you have questions, that is appropriate because this is an evolving conversation. As Spoon pointed out, there's a lot of different structures that we could be using. And so I hope many people show up to this forum over the weekend. So if they have questions, they can ask them directly before the March 3rd vote. Thank you for joining us today. This has been an episode of BCTV Open Studio. I am Olga Peters, Randy Holhut also from the Commons, and thank you Tony Duncan and Spoon Agave for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.